My name's Christopher. And I'd just watched 5 years of my life get handed to a 25-year-old kid who'd been at Ravens Park Ventures for just 5 months. Congratulations, James, I said, forcing the words through a smile that felt like broken glass. I'm 46 years old. James grinned as if he'd earned something. The conference room smelled like disappointment and stale coffee. Everyone, myself included, clapped. My manager, Isaac Patterson, stood at the head of the table, his chest puffed out like a rooster. James is going to do great things as our new regional operations director, he announced. This was the same position I'd been training for since 2019. The very one I was promised would be mine when old Henderson retired. I kept my hands folded and my face neutral. But a cold feeling settled in my chest, right where hope used to live. Everyone knew James was Isaac's nephew, but nobody talked about it. The kid's diploma was still fresh, and his confidence came from never having to earn anything. For 4 months, he'd watched me handle vendor contracts, manage supply chain logistics, and troubleshoot equipment failures across 4 states. Now, he was my boss. Christopher's been invaluable in getting James up to speed, Isaac added, as if that made it better. As if 5 years of perfect performance reviews and 60-hour weeks were just elaborate job training for someone else's future. I nodded, happy to help, I said. The meeting ended. People filed out, offering James handshakes and congratulations. I gathered my notepad and pen, moving slower than usual. My mind felt sharp and clear, like waking up in the middle of the night and suddenly understanding a problem that had been bothering you for months. Christopher, stick around a minute, Isaac called, catching my arm as I reached the door. We stood alone in the conference room. He loosened his tie and tried to look sympathetic. I know this might come as a surprise, he said, but James brings fresh perspectives, new energy. Sure, I replied. You understand, right? It's nothing personal. I looked at him for a long moment. Isaac was 53, soft around the middle, with thinning hair combed over to hide bald spots. He'd inherited his position when his father-in-law retired. The irony wasn't lost on me. I understand perfectly, I said. He relaxed. Good, I knew. You'd be professional about this. That's why you're such a valuable team member. Valuable. Not valuable enough for the promotion I'd earned, but valuable enough to train his nephew and smile about it. I walked back to my desk and sat down. The office buzzed with normal activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and people solving problems. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen for a full minute before I started typing. I'd started at Ravens Park Ventures in March 2018, right after my divorce was finalized. I needed a fresh start, and manufacturing logistics felt like a solid foundation to build on. The company handled industrial equipment distribution across the Southwest. Barring work that paid well and let me sleep at night, Isaac hired me himself, shaking my hand and saying they needed someone with my experience. I'd spent 12 years at my previous company before budget cuts eliminated my position. Starting over at 44 wasn't easy, but Isaac made it sound like an opportunity. We're growing fast, he'd said during my interview. Lots of room for advancement for the right people. I became the right people. I worked weekends when shipments were delayed and stayed late when customers had emergencies. I built relationships with suppliers from Phoenix to Houston. My performance reviews were spotless. Isaac always smiled and promised that bigger things were coming. Your management material, Christopher, he'd say, just need to be patient. Patient. I was good at being patient. My daughter, Sophia, visited every other weekend. She was 16 now, old enough to notice when her dad looked tired. Sometimes she'd find me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, laptop open, responding to work emails. Dad, it's the weekend, she'd say. Just catching up, I'd tell her. Building something good here. She'd roll her eyes, but she understood. Her mum had remarried a lawyer who worked reasonable hours and coached Little League. I was the dad who worked too much but sent her birthday money on time and never missed a school play. The first crack appeared 6 months ago when Isaac mentioned his nephew might be joining the company. Smart kid, he'd said. Just graduated from the University of Texas. Business degree. I'd nodded, thinking nothing of it. Companies hired recent graduates all the time, starting them in entry-level positions and letting them learn the business from the ground up. But James didn't start at the ground. He started in the office next to Isaac's, with the title Operations Specialist and a salary I could only guess at. Isaac introduced him around, like visiting royalty. James is going to observe our processes, Isaac announced. Learn how we do things. James observed by sitting in on my client calls, taking notes while I explained vendor negotiations, and asking questions that showed he didn't understand the basics of what we did, but he was eager. I'd give him that, and polite. He said yes, sir, and thank you, like his mother had raised him right. I trained him because that's what you do. You help the new guy. Even when the new guy's last name is Patterson and his uncle signs your paychecks. Even when you start to suspect where this is all heading. The moment I knew came 3 weeks ago during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had stayed late to finish quarterly reports. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I was heading to the break room for coffee when I heard voices from Isaac's office. His door was cracked open, and the hallway carried sound better than people realized. The board's going to ask questions, Isaac was saying. James has only been here 2 months. Another voice, deeper and older, probably James Mitchell from corporate. You said Christopher was ready for the promotion. Christopher's solid, but James's family, and he's got the degree. The board likes degrees. What about Christopher's experience? Isaac laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, but it wasn't kind either. Christopher's a good worker, reliable, but he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing, make good money, and everything works out. I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds, listening to them plan my future. James would get Henderson's position. I would train him, support him, and pretend to be grateful for the opportunity. Christopher won't cause problems, Isaac continued. He's got a daughter, alimony, payments. He needs this job. He'll fall in line. That's when I walked away quietly so they wouldn't hear my footsteps. I went back to my desk, saved my work, and left the building, driving home in complete silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Isaac's words. He'll fall in line, as if I were a horse being broken to a saddle, as if 5 years of loyalty and hard work had earned me the right to be grateful for scraps. I thought about Sophia, how proud she'd been when I told her about the possible promotion. My dad's going to be a director, she'd told her friends. Now I'd have to explain why that wasn't happening. I thought about my ex-wife, how she'd always said I was too passive. You let people walk all over you, Christopher, she'd said during one of our last fights. Stand up for yourself for once. Maybe she'd been right. The next morning, I came to work with a different mindset. I watched James more carefully. I noticed how Isaac included him in executive meetings while keeping me focused on day-to-day operations. I saw how other managers started deferring to James on decisions that should have been mine. 3 weeks later, sitting in that conference room watching James accept congratulations for a job he hadn't earned, I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Isaac thought I needed this job. He thought I'd fall in line because I had bills to pay and a daughter to support. He was wrong about a lot of things. I opened my laptop and started typing my resignation letter. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. For once in my life, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I submitted my resignation letter at exactly 4:30 p.m. on Friday. Isaac had just returned from walking James around the warehouse, showing him his new domain. I knocked on his door, handed him the envelope, and said, "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Isaac's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then something that looked like panic. He tore open the envelope and read quickly, his eyes darting back and forth across the page. "Is this a joke?" he said. "No, sir, you can't be serious. You're leaving because James got the promotion." I stayed quiet, letting him fill the silence. Isaac stood up, pacing behind his desk. "Christopher, Let's be reasonable here. You're upset. I get it. But walking away from 5 years of building your career, that's not smart. I've made my decision. What about your daughter? Your responsibilities? There it was. The leverage he thought he had. The reason I'd fall in line and keep quiet. I'll manage, I said. Isaac's tone shifted, getting harder. You realize how this looks right. Quitting because you didn't get promoted. It's unprofessional. Childish, I nodded. I can see how you'd think that. I won't give you a good reference. You understand that. Walking out like this, leaving us hanging. No company's going to want someone who throws tantrums. Something cold settled in my stomach. 5 years of perfect performance, and now I was throwing a tantrum. 5 years of staying late and working weekends, and now I was unprofessional. That's your choice, I said. Isaac sat back down, trying a different approach. Look, Christopher, I like you. You're good at what you do, but James brings something different to the table. Youth, fresh ideas, vision. Vision, I repeated. The board wants innovation, new thinking. James represents the future of this company. And what do I represent? Isaac paused. Experience, stability. Those are valuable, too. Valuable enough to train his replacement, but not valuable enough to promote. I understood the math. I appreciate the clarification, I said. Don't do this, Christopher. Take the weekend, think it over. Come back Monday, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. I looked at Isaac for a long moment. He genuinely believed I would back down. He believed that threatening my reference and questioning my professionalism would make me fold. I'll finish out my 2 weeks, I said. Train James on anything he needs to know. Isaac's face darkened. You'll train him. You think James needs training from someone who quits when things don't go his way. He's going to need to understand the vendor contracts, the supply chain logistics, the emergency protocols. I kept my voice level. Unless you plan to figure all that out yourself. That hit home. Isaac knew he didn't understand the technical side of operations, and neither did James. They needed me at least for 2 more weeks. Fine, Isaac said. 2 weeks, but don't expect any favors. Don't expect me to help you land somewhere else. You're burning bridges here, Christopher. I nodded and turned to leave. Christopher, Isaac called after me. You're making a mistake. A big one. I stopped at the door. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. I walked back to my desk, feeling lighter than I had in months. The office was mostly empty, people heading home for the weekend. James was still at his desk, studying organizational charts like they contained the secrets of the universe. I sat down and opened my laptop, starting to document everything James would need to know. Vendor contact information, emergency procedures, troubleshooting guides. Not because Isaac asked me to, but because the people who depended on our supply chains deserved better than chaos. My phone buzzed, a text message from my daughter. Dad, can we get dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about your week. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. I've got news to share. Good news for once. News about standing up for myself, about walking away from people who didn't value what I brought to the table. Isaac thought he was punishing me. He thought threatening my reference would make me grateful for the chance to stay. He had no idea what he just set in motion. Monday morning brought revelations. I arrived early, as usual, and found James already at his desk, looking overwhelmed. He had spreadsheets open on 3 monitors and was frantically taking notes from vendor emails. Morning, James, I said. How's the transition going? He looked up, relief flooding his face. Christopher, thank God. I've been here since 6, trying to understand the Morrison Industries account. Their procurement manager is threatening to cancel our contract if we don't resolve some shipping issue by noon. Morrison Industries, our biggest client, they ordered heavy machinery components worth $2 million annually. I'd been managing their account personally for 4 years. What's the issue? I asked. Something about delayed titanium brackets from our supplier in Tucson, but I can't figure out which supplier, and their emails are confusing. I looked at James's screen. He had Morrison's email open, but was also looking at supplier contracts that had nothing to do with titanium brackets. He was drowning. "James," I said carefully, "did Isaac brief you on the Morrison account? He said you'd handle the transition, but then he mentioned your situation, and I thought maybe I should figure it out myself. Show initiative. My situation, that's what they were calling it now." I spent the next 3 hours walking James through the Morrison relationship. I explained how their just-in-time delivery requirements worked. I showed him the backup supplier network I'd built over 4 years. I helped him understand why a simple shipping delay could cascade into a contract cancellation. "This is incredibly complex," James said as we finished resolving the crisis. "How do you keep track of all these moving parts?" "Experience," I said, "and good documentation. Could you show me your documentation system?" That's when I realized something. Isaac hadn't just promoted James without preparation. He'd promoted him without understanding what the job actually required. James wasn't incompetent, but he was completely unprepared for the scope of regional operations. I spent my lunch break making phone calls, reaching out to contacts I'd built over the years. Word travels fast in industrial logistics, and people were already hearing about changes at Ravens Park. Some were concerned about continuity. Others were curious about new opportunities. "Christopher," said Janet Morrison, the procurement manager who'd threatened to cancel that morning, "I heard rumors about management changes. Please tell me you're still handling our account." "For the next 2 weeks," I said. "After that, James Patterson will be your primary contact." Silence on the line. Patterson, as in Isaac Patterson's nephew. Jesus, Christopher, that kid called me this morning, asking questions that made no sense. I thought he was new to the team, not replacing you. He's eager to learn. I don't have time to train Ravens Park's management. We've got production schedules to meet. If your company can't provide competent service, we'll find someone who can. That conversation repeated itself 4 times with 4 different major clients. By the end of the day, I had a clearer picture of what would happen after I left. James would struggle. Clients would get frustrated. Isaac would panic and try to micromanage operations he didn't understand. The whole regional division would start bleeding clients within 6 months. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Tuesday morning, Isaac called me into his office. He looked tired and stressed. "Christopher, I've been thinking about our conversation. On Friday, maybe we were hasty. Maybe there's room for both you and James in management." Meaning, I could be an associate director, second in command to James. I'd handle the technical side. He'd focus on strategic planning. Associate director, a made-up title that meant doing the same job for the same pay while pretending James was my boss. "That's generous," I said, "but I'll stick with my original decision." Isaac's face hardened. "You're going to regret this, Christopher. I promise you that." Maybe, but I was done living in fear of Isaac's promises. By Wednesday, I had 3 job interviews scheduled and a plan that went beyond simply leaving Ravens Park. I'd spent 5 years building relationships in the Southwest industrial supply chain. Those relationships were mine, not the company's. My first interview was Thursday morning with Silverlinks Energy, a renewable energy equipment distributor based in Austin. Their regional manager, David Harrison, had been trying to poach me for 2 years. Christopher, David said, as we shook hands in his office, "I heard through the grapevine that you might be available." Word travels fast. It does when good people become available, especially people with your client relationships. David offered me a position as Regional Operations Director. The exact title Isaac had given to James. The salary was 30% higher than what I'd been making at Ravens Park. The benefits were better. And most importantly, they wanted me to bring my client network with me. "We've been trying to break into the heavy machinery component market," David explained. "Your relationships with Morrison Industries, Copperfield Manufacturing, and Border States Equipment would be invaluable." It was ethical, standard industry practice. Clients followed account managers they trusted. especially in a relationship-based business like industrial supply. I hadn't signed a non-compete agreement, and the clients I'd served were free to choose their suppliers. I'll need to give Ravens Park 2 weeks' notice, I said. Of course, professional courtesy, though I suspect they might release you early. Once they understand the situation, David was right about that. Friday afternoon, Isaac called me into his office again. James sat in the corner, looking miserable. Apparently, word of my Thursday interview had reached them. I hear you're interviewing with competitors, Isaac said. I'm exploring opportunities. While you're still employed here, while you're training, James, that's a conflict of interest. I stayed quiet. It's also corporate espionage, Isaac continued, sharing proprietary information with competitors. I haven't shared any proprietary information. Your client relationships are proprietary. My client relationships are personal. I built them over 5 years of professional service. Isaac's face was red. Now, those clients belong to Ravens Park Ventures. You take them with you, and we'll sue you for everything you're worth. James spoke up from the corner. Uncle Isaac, maybe we should shut up. James. Isaac didn't take his eyes off me. Christopher, you walk out that door and try to steal our clients. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I stood up slowly. Isaac, I've given you 5 years of my life. Perfect performance reviews, 60-hour weeks. I trained your nephew to take the job you promised me. I've been nothing but professional through this entire process. And now I'm finishing my 2 weeks notice and moving on to a better opportunity. What happens after that depends on how you handle the transition. Isaac leaned back in his chair. We'll see about that. I walked to the door, then turned back. James, if you need help with anything over the next week, just ask. Despite what your uncle thinks, I want you to succeed. James nodded gratefully. Isaac glared. I spent my last week at Ravens Park documenting everything James would need to know. Not because Isaac deserved it, but because James was 23 years old and had been thrown into a situation beyond his control. On my final day, I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to coworkers, and handed Isaac my security badge. This isn't over, Isaac said. For me, it is, I replied. I walked out of Ravens Park Ventures feeling lighter than I had in years. The payback came 6 months later, but not in the way I'd expected. I was settling into my new role at Silverlinks Energy when David Harrison called me into his office with a grin on his face. Christopher, you need to see this, he said, sliding a business magazine across his desk. The headline read, Ravens Park Ventures Regional Division Hemorrhages, Clients, Family Drama Blamed. The article detailed how Ravens Park had lost 4 major accounts in 5 months, including Morrison Industries and Copperfield Manufacturing. Revenue in the Southwest region was down 60%. The board had launched an investigation into management practices. Isaac Patterson was terminated last week, David said. Apparently, the board discovered that James Patterson had been hired without proper qualifications. Nepotism investigation, they're calling it. I read further. James had resigned voluntarily after 3 months of struggling with accounts he couldn't manage. He'd returned to graduate school. According to the article, Isaac faced a lawsuit from Morrison Industries for breach of contract after a supply chain failure caused a production delay that cost them $2 million. Here's the interesting part, David continued. 3 of their remaining clients have already reached out to us, specifically asking if you're available to handle their accounts. The article mentioned that several former Ravens Park employees had been recruited by competitors, taking their institutional knowledge with them. No names were listed, but I recognized the pattern. When good people leave a company, others notice. What goes around comes around, David said. Isaac Patterson spent 5 years taking you for granted. Now he's unemployed while you're building our Southwest division. I folded the magazine and handed it back. I feel bad for James, I said. Kid got thrown into a situation he wasn't ready for. James will be fine. He's young, he'll learn from this. Isaac, on the other hand, double quotes. David shrugged. Hard to feel sorry for someone who threw away good people to promote family. A year later, I was driving through Tucson on business when I stopped. For lunch at a diner near the airport, James Patterson was sitting alone in a corner booth, reading a textbook. He looked up when I approached. "Christopher, what are you doing here?" "Business trip, mind if I sit?" He gestured to the empty seat across from him. James looked older, more serious. The textbook was Industrial Supply Chain Management. "Back in school?" I asked. "Master's program at Arizona State. Supply chain focus," he said with a wry smile. "Figured I should actually learn what I was supposed to be doing." "That's smart." "I wanted to thank you," James said, "for how you handled everything. You could have hung me out to dry, but you didn't. You tried to help me succeed. You were in an impossible situation. Uncle Isaac still blames you for everything. Says you sabotaged the company." I sipped my coffee. "What do you think?" James closed his textbook. "I think I was 23 years old with a business degree and no experience. I think Uncle Isaac gave me a job I wasn't qualified for because I was family. And I think you spent 5 years earning a promotion that should have been yours." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I'm sorry about how everything went down," James said. "You deserved better." "We both did," I said. "But sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to." James nodded. "I heard you're doing well at Silverlinks." "I am, and you'll do well too, once you're ready." I paid for both our lunches and shook James's hand before leaving. He was a good kid who'd been used as a pawn in his uncle's game. 6 months later, Isaac Patterson filed for bankruptcy after losing his wrongful termination lawsuit against the Ravens Park Board of Directors. James graduated with honors and landed an entry-level position at a logistics company in Phoenix, where he spent 2 years learning the business from the ground up before earning his first promotion. The nephew had learned what the uncle never understood, that respect and advancement must be earned, not inherited. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away and building something better.